As the hurricane was taking shape, the president on Friday night at around 10 o'clock announced by Twitter that he was pardoning Sheriff Joe Arpaio down in Arizona. As you know, that sheriff has been convicted for defying a judge's order to stop racially profiling Latinos, and the president's action has been met by a chorus of opposition. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, both Arizona senators, both Republican Arizona senators, and this morning a blast from the former Vice President Joe Biden. I want to read it here. He's saying the president's contempt for the U.S. Constitution and willingness to divide this nation knows no bounds. Now he's pardoned a law enforcement official who terrorized the Latino community, violated its constitutional rights, defied a federal court order to stop, and ran a prison system so rife with torture and abuse, he himself called it a concentration camp. Your response?
Well, Vice President Biden is both loved and known for his hyperbole. I think that's another example of it. I think it's pretty straightforward what the president did. I think there's some disproportionate coverage of it right now as I remain focused on and Governor Abbott focuses on the 4.6 million people in the greater Houston area. I think the Arpaio pardon is pretty straightforward. And George, as you know, the president you work for and just about every modern president ends up with some controversial pardons. But I think the president's been pretty clear on it, and I certainly don't think it's fair to characterize him as not caring about the rule of law.
Well, that characterization came also from Senator McCain. It also came from Speaker of the House Paul Ryan as well. And you're absolutely right. Presidents have absolute pardon powers. President Clinton got criticized for his pardon of Mark Rich, but this is somewhat different. President Trump here said that Arpaio was convicted for, quote, doing his job. How is defying a court order protecting constitutional rights doing his job?
Well, I don't know the particulars of the court order, but as I understand it, it was a contempt order and not an issue of his job or not his job. I really don't know the details of it, but I do know the president's been pretty clear about his defense of it and his decision. I'm pretty certain, too, George, that this is not something that's going to threaten our constitutional order.
Again, that is being disputed by the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, by Senator John McCain as well. And the president, you say he's been clear in defending the Sheriff Arpaio and his pardon. He called him a patriot who kept us safe, also praised his admirable service. This is a man who held inmates in brutal conditions, humiliated them, promoted the birther lie about President Obama. How is that admirable service?
Well, I'm sure those are all assertions that you're much more familiar with than me, but I'm right now focused on not only the 4.6 million people in the Houston area, but the millions of people around the country who are trying to bring together, outside of these divisive political questions, their efforts and their prayers to help those people who are in need. So my guess is that not too many people care about this one guy right now.
I recognize.
They care about the millions of guys that are worried
I understand
about
that,
their homes.
And you have been praised for the work you're doing on the flood, but you're also the advisor of Homeland Security. Sheriff Arpaio's actions come within the realm of Homeland Security. I'm asking, how can you call the actions laid out by Sheriff Arpaio contempt of court, something he's shown no remorse for, admirable service?
Well, I didn't. What I think you're doing is asking me what the merits of the pardon are. I think there's a clemency argument that can be made for the long history of service, both in the United States military and in law enforcement for the sheriff. I think the president's been pretty clear. It's pretty straightforward that he believes that long history of service merits this clemency, and he's acted accordingly. And so I suspect that what you're doing is disagreeing with that, and I understand that disagreement, and I respect it.
I'm asking whether or not you agree with it. Let's move on to the border wall. Also comes in your responsibility. The president in Phoenix this week threatening to shut down the government over funding for the wall. Let's listen.
Build that wall. Now, the obstructionist Democrats would like us not to do it, but believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall.
Now, the president promised repeatedly during the campaign that Mexico is going to pay for that wall. So why should the government shut down over a wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for?
Yeah, I think the key here is that the funding for the wall that has to come now, the immediate funding for this capital project, has to come through this appropriations process. The means and mechanisms for reimbursing our fisc and to making some agreement with the Mexicans that can come through other forms. I think the president has alluded to that on a number of occasions. But I think what's important here is that the wall works. I recently said that words matter and walls work, and I said that for a reason. Just before that speech that you played, George, we had visited the Yuma sector where a wall was built and a barrier was constructed in 2006, I believe, or starting then. And the results have been pretty undisputable in terms of the reduced number of border crossings. And the length of that 370 or so mile region of responsibility for that sector was really not patrollable without some barrier assistance and some wall. And I think the president has recognized that as well. And so from my perspective, the wall is something that works. The wall is something that's a relatively small investment for the return that we receive. And the president's asked for it in a responsible budget package that carries out the responsibilities of the entire federal government.
But he's also...
And so I think the responsibility now does fall back to the Democrats and others in Congress to decide whether that priority is something that they would like to shut the government down over, or whether they'd like to carry out the president's budget and his responsibility to protect the border.
It's the president threatening to shut the government down, and it's the president who said that Mexico is going to pay for it. You're the one who said that words matter. The president's known since January from the Mexicans, from a phone call himself, that the Mexicans aren't going to pay for it. The Secretary of State hasn't even brought it up in his meetings with the Mexicans, either as the Secretary of Treasury. So can you concede now the Mexicans are not going to pay for that wall, which is why you're asking Congress to pay for it?
No. So as I said just a moment ago, what we'll do here is go through the mechanism of getting the original initial money that we need for that capital project from Congress through an appropriations process, and we'll responsibly construct the barrier on the border. As we work with the Mexicans and other policies and trade policies and such, we'll determine ways for us to make that right. But
you've had no indication from the Mexicans they're going to pay for it. So is the president now saying he's going to veto any funding bill that doesn't include wall funding?
Well, we'll let that play out. I have every confidence right now that Congress is going to meet the president's budget request. I think it's a responsible one that puts us on a path to solvency and it puts us on a path to better national security. So I don't know why I would speculate on vetoing that. I think we're going to get a good bill from Congress. And if we don't, we'll end up in a continuing resolution, and the American people will see that there's obstruction from Congress, and they'll be continued in their frustrations.
Well, the Democrats and many Republicans made it clear they're not going to have that wall funding. We'll see what happens. Finally, the president also talked a lot about Charlottesville in his comments when he was in Phoenix this week. And late in the week, Gary Cohn, your colleague in the White House, head of the National Economic Council, spoke out to the Financial Times. He said that citizens standing up for equality and freedom can never be equated with white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the KKK. This administration can and must do better in consistently and unequivocally condemning these groups. Do you believe the administration can and must do better?
I believe that the administration has condemned those groups. I know I've gone on the record and done it as well a number of times. And so I'd like to say it again in clear, unequivocal terms. There's no room in this country for racial violence or bigotry or neo-Nazi groups at all, period. I can't be clearer. I think the administration's been clear. Now, for me, I'm focused right now on the 4 or 5 million people, probably 23 million people at the end of the day in the direct path of this storm that are suffering. And I hope that Gary Cohn is focused on the 300 million people who need tax relief. I know Donald Trump is.
But the president also said that there were very fine people marching with the white supremacists. Who did he have in mind?
Well, I think you'll have to ask the president how he wanted to parse the groups of people. But I suspect from being around him at that time that you'll find some reason to believe that there are two groups that were there, or multiple groups that were there, not creating any moral equivalency between them. But there were also citizens from Charlottesville, not the outside protester group. So I'd ask you to ask the president for clarification, but that's my suspicion.
But just once you see, and even Speaker Ryan has spoken about this, once you see the torches, hear the chants, how can you be a very fine person and continue to march?
No, I don't think anybody chanting those things is a very fine person, period.
Tom Bossert, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.